Hello and welcome to the Wonket Weekend live chat. I'm Robin Panacchia and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson. No
Hello,
relation.
hello, Robin. How are you?
Hello, Stephen. I'm swell. How are you?
I'm okay. Jumping into our topic today. So, a lot of folks on the right, particularly the two Davids, David French, David Brooks,
Can't
and
tell them
other
apart.
and others have been trying to figure out why conservatives have become mean or nasty or slightly less
Terrible
politely
in general,
flashes.
I think, is um, really just the most succinct way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, there are varying stories for this. And I know Tom Nichols, one of the Never Trumpers, he gets very upset if anyone tries to like form a narrative from when he was a Republican. So, actually going back to
Oh, yeah.
64
No, no, no,
uh,
no.
and leading up for Reagan was all optimism and ideas. And then suddenly things went bad with Trump. Like Trump is sort of their scapegoat. Far be it from me to defend Trump. Trump is terrible, but he is very much a scapegoat for many, I find, conservatives who don't want to acknowledge what had been building up. They sort of there's the Richard Pryor line about from the 80s about how uh, down in, like, say, Alabama and Mississippi, they had white folks who scared white folks. They were like locked up in the basement, growling at the, and that was sort of it. Like, so the white folks who scared white folks were under control.
Yeah, they
They
were up in the
voted.
attic.
They voted, and as they should, they would, be slight, coded racism towards them and to get them to the polls. And then suddenly they were kind of like, no, I don't. We want to run the show. So the Marjorie Taylor
Yeah.
Greens want to run the show. But believe me, I grew up in the South. Marjorie Taylor Greene did not just spring forth. I mean, um
Fully
I
formed from David
no.
Brooks's neck.
I had an sixth grade teacher who was very much like Marjorie Taylor Greene, hated me. I was the only black. I was in like an advanced class. I was only black. She would sometimes come up to me. She'd be very angry, like, "You think you're so smart?" It's like, okay, like I'm just in here. I'm just trying to get through. Um, and what's funny is that I think everyone remembers her very fondly. So people will be like, "Oh, but she was so cool." It's like, no, no, she really hated me. Uh,
Okay, true story. Cool teachers were the worst. I'm sorry to like go off a little bit. Cool teachers were without question always the absolute worst if you were like, you know, remotely uncool yourself. I
uh,
love the
yeah.
asshole teachers. The asshole teachers loved me.
And I did have a teacher who was an asshole. That was
Yeah.
one of my eighth grade teachers who always reminds me of Blackburn in Tennessee, the senator there. It's the same with the hair,
You're a
the
different
look.
kind of asshole.
Very,
Like,
very. That was, but these folks always existed, and I think there was a sense of
oh yeah.
shock that there's been um, trending some video of very polite suburban white ladies, talking about how black people better not move into their neighborhood, and they should not, and how they were pushing, through homeowners associations and so forth. So that's always
Yeah.
existed. So we could read this thing from that David Brooks. I'd written about this earlier this week, but he says, most important story about why Americans have become sad and alienated and rude, I believe, is also the simplest. We inhabit a society in which people are no longer trained in how to treat others with kindness and consideration. Our society has become one in which people feel licensed to give their selfishness free rein. The story I'm going to tell is about morals. In a healthy society, a web of institutions, families, schools, religious groups, community organizations. Oh, sorry. I dozed off there. So he
Really, it's hard to read without doing that. I had to read. I like actually like had it on audio so that like I wouldn't like just like doze off in the middle of trying to read it myself. It didn't work.
yeah, so something I'd mentioned was how this guy's paid an awful lot of money to be completely unaware Like, it's not just
of
to
the
have it.
surroundings at any given time.
Well, like, and the example I gave was, it's one thing, people have opinions, so it's fine. If I'm a musical theater critic, it's okay for me to have an opinion or whatever. But if I behave as if, you know, if I get things fundamentally wrong about musical theater history, my opinion has no weight. Like,
Yeah.
if I, like, well, no, this is a basic fact about something that occurred that then led to this. It's not about your opinion. So, I mean, for folks watching at home who might not be unaware of it, like, racism and the homophobe, all this was in fact taught. That was part of
Yeah.
etiquette. Was like, to how to etiquette was in many ways was about, I mean, the most benign form of etiquette is to, as I like to practice it, is to how to be kind to other people, to not make people feel left out, etc.,
Yeah.
and be comfortable. But that's not how it was traditionally practiced writ large. Often it was about how to maintain a hierarchy, how to exclude people, because it was like secret handshakes in a way,
Yeah.
so we know who's part of us and who's
Well,
not.
that's actually like, why lifting your pinky when you drink is now considered tacky, because it was originally it's a fairly like silly thing, but it was originally invented to like trick nouveau riche people, so that like you could spot who was nouveau riche and who wasn't, like, old money Boston Brahmin types. And that was a very, very large
Mhm.
part of it in general. It was like, oh, let's try and trick people. And yes, this is correct. That is how to use the correct fork. But, when are any of us needing to use the correct fork? I
Well,
just like the small ones, actually. I like
we're,
solid.
we're we're not we're not animals, Robin.
Yes.
Uh, you work like they're different. That serves some sort of a purpose. I will defend that.
I'm kidding. I'm seriously just joking. I don't use salad forks for everything.
Yes.
I thought it would be funny.
But if you did, I would not. I would just use the correct one in front of you. I would not bring it. I would not bring it up and embarrass you in front of other people. That's the polite
Well,
etiquette.
that's because you are gracious.
But less polite etiquette is sort of literally Jim Crow etiquette. And
Mhm.
I've written about this. It was like how Black people were meant to interact with white people, and not just in the South, but across, how to defer to them, how and in fact, cross the street. So you didn't like we're on the same street with them. And these are things of where if you got that etiquette wrong, you died.
Yeah.
So I figured that's a much nastier world than even one now with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I've never been one to get all about nostalgia. I think that's something that it's the fundamental difference, I would say, between the boomers like my father, my aunts who are still
Mhm.
alive, and white boomers, because they're kind of like, yeah, I mean, we've got internet and we don't get lynched at the same rate as before. Like, things are kind of,
Yeah.
I think things are going well, but these guys write from such a specific white maleness, whiteness that's so
Mhm. Well,
oblivious to
because this is
identifying.
the thing, they've centered white maleness, and so that's all they're looking at. They're looking at how things are different for white men at this particular point in history, and using that to describe what's happening with everyone writ large, because white men are supposed to be the center of the universe, obviously.
What's dangerous about that is, and this goes back during the Obama administration, David Brooks was sought after. Like,
Oh, yeah.
the idea was that to get his approval on something was, but like, that was the ideal reasonable white guy
Mhm.
they were trying to appeal. And so you get people like Chris Murphy, and Jamie Lynn Crofts and I talked a bit about this, and something that's going to go up tomorrow, so I'm not going to step too much on that. But this idea of how um, they're just chasing that white male mediocrity. So Chris Murphy is like sharing this stuff from David Brooks, sharing these articles, and I
Mhm.
see tons of elected Democrats, specifically white men, and it's the latest David Brooks. They love never Trumpers, these white male guys.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and we're guilty of this even at Wacky. We share a lot from the Bulwark people, and I get that you don't.
Literally not once ever. Just saying. Literally
But
not once ever.
the role, the sort of collective we at Wacky has, like the Bulwark and these guys, and we'll share these pieces. But we, far more than say Jacobin or something from The Intercept. And you ask yourself, like, for these Democrats, I mean, Matt Yglesias is apparently highly read in the Biden White House, and it's like, are you reading Jamil Hill, Roxanne Gay, Parker Malone, like all these people who aren't just liberals or on the left, but actually represent the people who are actively being targeted against. And you'll come out during election time and be like, okay, well, now you've got to vote for us because you're this marginalized group and your literal life is at stake. So please vote for us. But we don't actually elevate your voice or actually think that much about you other than when we're going to come out hand in hand. And it's sort of a very, you'd written about this last week with that new song, and Chris Murphy also stepped in his face on this, about rich men north of Richmond.
Yes, Richmond. Oh, he's so clever, so clever.
Richmond north of Richmond, a terrible, because of the potential tongue twister, by the previously unknown Oliver Anthony, which many claim is a song that finally gives voice to their anguish. That is a direct quote from Robin, by the way. So
their anguish over, all of the pain in their lives being caused by fat people. Like that is really like literally that is their big issue. They're like, fat people exist and are on welfare instead of starving themselves because, people are like bears, and once they're somewhat overweight can just not eat forever and don't ever need to eat again until they're a size 0, and that's just how things work.
I don't want to get into weight shaming, but it's just frustrating because it's been proven again and again. And so to me, it's like, I'm someone who is like, if you come at me from good faith and you're ignorant about something, I'm not going to smack you around. I'm going to be like, okay, well, you can't touch my hair, but let me explain to you something about my hair. I'm open to that. But like, I feel like if you are a genuine human being, it's been proven again and again and again that being poor, the food that you can afford,
Yeah.
is not what they say, like, only shop at the corners of the edges of the
Yeah.
store.
That's where it's expensive.
That is very expensive. So
And it doesn't last very long in your fridge.
So shelf stable food, and stuff that has the most caloric bang for the buck, so that if you can, that is going to sometimes lead to people being heavier than people. Also, the gym is expensive and other stuff. And I don't want to get into the weight shaming stuff.
Also, I'm also just going to point out that, like, if you're poor, it can also be very depressing, and maybe you want a fucking fudge round or whatever. Like,
yeah, that's the least.
Because really, it's upsetting. I gained a lot of weight when I was unemployed because I was like freaked out all of the time.
Yeah.
And I barely went out at all. And I lived on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then would just randomly get junk because I was upset. And there's just so much that contributes to that, other than like, I want to screw over these real poor people who are, sad white men playing guitar in the middle of a forest or whatever. But
yeah,
so much of this, and even like so much of the response to that song, hinges on the idea of inherent white male reasonableness.
mm-hmm.
They are inherently more reasonable than the rest of us. They are not controlled by their emotions like, women and non-white men, and they don't have anything to gain. There's this idea that, like, oh well, women are trying to be equal, people of color are trying to be equal, so they have that agenda. White men are just reasonable.
Yeah.
And so they are, from their own perspective, they are objective. They don't have, the agenda that the rest of us have to, like, not be treated like shit. And so if things are going weird with them, then something's really up.
Yeah, and I mean, when Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, Democratic senator from Connecticut, shared this, and he was like, we need to understand where they're coming from and blah blah blah. And it's not like it's not like I'm not interested in understanding people. It's just that this is not particularly compelling art. And it's also, again, as I was saying before about understanding history, this is classic lost cause narrative. I mean, that's a consistent pattern of, like, working, that the elites and this in post Reconstruction is this way. The elites were the Yankees coming in, upsetting the way of life for good,
Carpetbaggers.
solid of their people,
Yeah.
and that centers poor white people who, and this is somewhat of classic Marxist theory, right? Because the poor white people weren't identifying with poor black people who were either recently enslaved and whatever, they were identifying with um, other white people. This is not new, and so everything he says is sort of tired and cliched, and we've gotten it. But so many guys like Murphy were leaping towards this as some sort of new way of understanding the white male who has been so shy about telling us how they're feeling about things. And
We
um
have no idea that they're hurting.
and he yeah, it's not that particularly compelling. And no Democrat is going to share, say, a rap song. God forbid if it's a rap song about
Yeah.
not liking cops in the inner city, where we should understand how these folks feel, right? Like whenever it comes up, because it's complicated. Yes, whenever they talk about police reform, and it's like, well, don't you like when cops? Well, I like when people solve crimes, but if you live in those neighborhoods, that's not the how cops exist. That cops
Yeah.
exist in the
No.
form of no knock warrants and killing you in your sleep and that type of thing. And but those stories, that anguish, that sense of what the world is like, Democrats, I don't expect Republicans to care if that's not their constituency. But it would be great if Democrats were more interested in understanding, people they expect to vote for them rather than the other people in their country club. And that's just been this long-standing,
Mhm.
and I think it's gotten worse post-Trump. I mean, I think post-Trump there was this, you know, instead of, say, the New York Times and other publications, including the Atlantic, rushing out and hiring and elevating and giving voice to women of all sorts of races and gender identities, and to Black people and Latino. Instead, it was always about an equal opportunity program to former Republicans,
Yeah.
from and also to anyone who wasn't a drooling fascist. But as Matt Iglesias said, because you'd written about the guy who had been revealed to be a white nationalist, but he was
Yeah.
somewhat of a new darling, anti-woke darling. And Matt Iglesias was like, well, we have to understand conservatives and so forth and everything. And it's like, okay, well, also, they like when the Times gives articles to give space to even someone like David French. The illusion out there, and it's not helpful for democracy. The illusion is that there is this, significant demographic of good Republicans.
Mhm.
And that's great if you want to believe that about your relatives who vote for Trump, that they're a good guy. But that's just not our reality. Trump has got like about 60% of Republican primary voters. And if you count DeSantis, who's also terrible, now you've got like about 75% of it's terrible. And the others are all trying to appeal to terrible people in a certain way. So you've got like, where are these good? It's not interesting, frankly, their point of view. Like, if you want to know your enemy, frankly, give people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert columns, but they're not from
Mhm.
the country club, right? So they're not going to be in the Atlantic. And it would be scary, but also would prepare Americans perhaps more if they realize this is what's out there. This is, I mean, you've
But
been,
people do the like, I don't want to hear about those people. I'm so tired of hearing about them. Well, they're shaping policy a lot more than like the, nicety, the pretend nice Republicans are. So maybe do pay attention to them. I realize that you are very delicate, but
yeah, you would get so much pushback even prior to 2020 when you wrote about QAnon and
mhm.
those folks and the MRA who
Well, I
became
stopped
the
writing
party.
about MRAs for one cat because, like, honestly, like people were too mean to me about it, and I was like, I will. At some point, I'll probably figure out some other way to do it. But people were like, I don't want to know that these men exist. Well, now we have Andrew Tate. Like,
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, I'm not saying that like writing about them would have prevented that, but at the same time, like, it doesn't just because people are existing and being terrible on you know, an underground platform, that's how you see like what's coming up and what is about to, you know, burst forth unto our nation. And, yeah, everyone got the piece of ignoring those people and being like, okay, we don't need to give those people attention. And now we have like, they are extremely, extremely influential, probably like more influential, more, sorry, they're a lot more influential than I am. Why can't I say that word? Weird.
That's the problem with rich men north of Richmond and that type of,
Yes.
no tongue as a writer of a playwright. You have to learn, no tongue twisters.
The sixth sheep sick. Yep, no, not good at it.
No. Yeah, so this is ongoing since trying to figure out why half the country is not, specifically a majority of white people are supporting of fascism. And I mean, this is like a circle jerk. It doesn't benefit. I don't know. I'm all for, look, we need to figure out how we can win elections because that's how we can protect ourselves. And I think that we should think of ways of doing that. I just feel like this is not it, because it's just a fellow, like, you're not going to learn anything from David Brooks.
Mhm.
So that's,
I actually will say, we talked about, both Davids, and I feel like David French, weirdly enough, had a better idea of what was going on a little bit more so than Brooks did, because basically, like, he wrote a thing. Like, basically, I don't know. For some reason, they were both like writing dueling op-eds on basically the same subject and mostly agreeing with each other. But he wrote an op-ed called "The Lost Boys of the American Right." It was basically like they just keep outdoing each other, and no one can ever tell anyone no, because the second that anyone tells them no, it's, oh, you're a weakling. And like, yes, that is in fact what's happening. That is at
mhm.
least a like actual observation of what is happening in their world, rather than, people got mean. Why? Is it because of the internet? Is it because we're not sending people to finishing school? Because that could be a problem.
Name
I
your
mean,
prop.
are we not selling enough copies of this? It's a thing I own. It's insane. Sorry.
Yes, it was Miss Vanderbilt's
Amy
book.
Vanderbilt um, is my favorite, all-time favorite etiquette columnist and writer, because she is, as far as I know, the only professional etiquette writer to die by defenestrating herself. And you know what? I'm sorry, I admit it. I like that. She also gives, like, if you read these books, by the way, I do want to point out, vis-a-vis Brooks, they're like, to some extent they're about making people feel comfortable. They're about giving people a certain amount of like rules to live by, which I think like does make some people feel more comfortable in terms of like being, if they can't necessarily um read body language or read, understand people very well, there are rules and people understand the rules. There are also things, so on the one hand you have things like, someone asks her, whose job is it to end a date for teenage girls and teenage boys? And she says, it is the girl's job to end the date. And she does so by placing her napkin to the left of her, unfolded napkin to the left of her plate, and looking at her partner questioningly, which I guess goes like that. I don't know. And so, on the one hand, specific rules that sound insane, but probably actually did help people who were not necessarily good at picking up signals. By the way, she can choose to stay, but if she decides to leave, it's all over. But then there are 80 bajillion confusing things on how to address people, who you're allowed to talk to, who you can introduce to who. And instructions for eating corn on the cob that take 2 hours. Like, you would literally need 2 hours to eat one corn on the cob, because you have to eat each row individually and cut it off one row at a time. And that seems like a lot. I
Mm.
would be exhausted. But there's not necessarily whatever is happening in David Brooks's imagination, where you're necessarily teaching people how to be kind.
Yeah.
Like, it's not teaching kindness, it's teaching, like, here are some social rules so that you can go to a party and not make an asshole of yourself, which I will say probably useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, that
But,
was
not about actual kindness. It doesn't make meanness go away.
no, I mean, it's a way of having sort of, I mean, Brooks had written something about marriage. Again, the idea that marriage being the
Oh
key
yeah.
to everything, and as he said, a great marriage and a crappy career is better than a good career and a crappy marriage. So I always thought the best key to a marriage is doing well enough to have two bathrooms, but
That is super fancy. Yeah.
or at
I would
least,
love two bathrooms and I'm not even married.
well, yeah, I mean, but like I think as of sharing, I do think that there's a degree to which money does buy happiness in the sense of decreasing tension that might exist otherwise.
Yeah. Um I think sorry, collecting my thoughts here because ADHD and also an air and water show happening as I speak that makes me keep thinking I'm getting bombed. Um so the part of the crux of Brooks's whole shtick is, oh, we're not, you know, oh, sorry, sorry. I do think, as far as marriage goes and actually like speaking with women goes, I do think that that does to some degree have a mollifying effect on men, and on heterosexual men. And what I mean by that is, right now we do have a whole lot of angry white men who do not speak to women outside of school. Like, they do not like really learn how to interact with other people. They're not hanging out in person, and I think that is like, they're not really engaging in regular socialization. Not like socialization like partying, but like general like socialization of being a person. I do think that that does affect how they treat people and how they act
Oh,
and the
sure.
amount to which they ratchet things up.
Well,
Because
if the belief was that etiquette rules and all that sort of stuff was part of a nanny state, and many men
yeah,
believe that, right? And the feminization of the world. So even back in sort of good old days where men didn't necessarily have women friends, they were still sort of governed by etiquette, right? Of what
yeah,
how to behave or how to certain things. So now if that does not exist and men don't socialize, they are kind of almost feral in a way, right? Like these men
yeah.
are just, and they don't know how to engage. They're constantly rejected, and women are telling them things, and especially if they don't understand the language, they're constantly being told things that, granted, I mean, these guys are because
Oh, absolutely,
they don't
absolutely.
like when women are direct with them, but they also don't like, they feel manipulated when women are politely letting them down or politely telling them no sex for you. So um, and then they decide to um, overthrow the government. But like,
Well,
I
it
don't.
does to focus into absolute rage. And I do believe that when you don't really have to take an act on the road, by which I mean, like, it's not like you're sitting around discussing this with people in person. It's, you're typing it on a computer, you're not discussing it. You can veer towards some pretty crazy shit because, you're not used to seeing the looks on people's faces that, like, oh, clearly you're freaking nuts and also like terrible. I do think that that has some sort of effect on people, and like not getting that kind of feedback, and they're the only feedback that they're getting is, wow, it is super great when you're an asshole. Another thing I would like to point out on that same level is the manipulation thing that I've just been thinking about a lot today. And I think it is, or this weekend, and I think it's very relevant. I saw this video of a woman who had very tragically lost all of her teeth due to a calcium deficiency during pregnancy. doing a TikTok video in which she like did her makeup and made herself look beautiful, which was like awesome. Good for, that's great. And the fucking rage men had, the absolute rage they had over her supposedly, this is like a married mother of several kids, tricking them into believing that she is beautiful when she is not, was absolutely, like, it was like sick. It was actually just sickening. And at the same time, you have these men who are pouring hundreds, thousands of dollars into learning how to trick women, like actively being like, we're going to trick women into thinking that we are not, we are viable in some capacity or another. Whereas women are just like, hey, I learned how to put my makeup on in a good way. Um, and
Yeah.
it's this fucking, is this absolute rage where like women are evil and they're always manipulating us and trying to get something from us, but they're the only ones holding fucking courses on it.
Yeah, I mean that's an old Chris Rock routine about women are liars because they wear makeup,
Mhm.
and this guy is, and it is seen as malicious, as opposed to men picking up women using lines or being clever is
Yeah,
seen as being cool, and it's a very
yeah,
clear double
because
standard.
they're improving themselves. We talk about men improving themselves. We talk about women tricking men.
But yeah, I actually do want to read the full. Someone had commented the full David Brooks marriage quote because it ends in an absurd
Mhm.
way. So my strong advice is to obsess less about your career and to think a lot more about marriage. Please respect the truism that if you have a great career and a crappy marriage, you will be unhappy. But if you have a great marriage and a crappy career, you will be happy. Please use your youthful years as a chance to have romantic relationships so you'll have some practice when it comes time to wed. Even if you're years away, please read books on how to decide whom to marry. Read George Eliot and Jane Austen. Start with the masters. And someone commented that this proves that he has not actually read George Eliot or
I was just gonna say, I'm like,
Jane Austen.
Mr. Darcy was a great choice.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that book, Pride and Prejudice, does very clear that marriage and a career is sort of very much equal. Like if
Yeah,
she hadn't married Mr. Darcy, if that hadn't turned out well, she'd been thrown out of her house and living in poverty, which is not sort of should not be the pressure upon any human being that they should have to marry to succeed in the world. Um, yeah, someone had commented if women don't wear makeup, misogynists will carp about them looking plain or ugly and not making themselves appealing to men. Yes, that is
because
a
that is obviously our job. Um,
well, you
it's
need to look
yeah.
hot if you don't. I mean, but that's a certain. These are guys who are really lost. But what's
Mhm.
disturbing is that when these folks who um all among the right, they even the good Republic, these folks were reading the Daily Wire. They
Yeah.
considered Ben Shapiro one of their own for the longest. And even if they were to disagree with him now about something, a bulwark person is more inclined to do it in a sort of way of, oh, Ben, rather than this guy is a, misogynist, bigot,
Well,
homophobic.
he was going to be like, their whatever heir apparent or something, and now he's like, just as wacky. I mean, he was always wacky. They're wacky, but now he's like more forward about his wackiness. Um, One thing that I do want to point out here, is that so much of Brooks's thing is like, oh, we're not, people are all out for themselves now. They're all, instead of being involved in community and everything. And one of the things that it just was very jarring to me about that is the fact that that has been the Republican line on how things should be for the last, like, ever. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got one of the biggest influences on the conservative movement in America is Ayn Rand, whatever the fuck her name is, um, whose whole deal was that altruism is bad and that the best thing anyone can do for society is to be out for themselves entirely. You had Republicans telling people unions are bad. what you need is to like be out for yourself, and you
Mhm.
advocate for yourself instead of advocating for, with everyone else, because that's how you're going to get ahead, and that's, how we're going to get the best from society. That's, and so they are the ones who chipped away at the whole idea of any kind of community beyond like church and family, any kind of like
Mhm.
communion with other people. They're the ones who, very much chipped away at the idea of solidarity between working class people and tried to set working class people up against each other. Like working class white people, working class black people, working class immigrants, people of color, etc. It's like, you guys all fight, and we're just gonna hang out up here and, chill with the job creators.
Yeah, I mean the job create. I mean that is Rand's. I mean, from having read her stuff long ago, it's not so much about beating up bullies and taking their purse. It is very much the sort of trickle down economics idea. If you focus on yourself and you are a best case to not so lift boats, all rising tide lift all boats, but very much the Reagan thing. Like you
Yeah,
go become a billionaire, and you're going to create all these jobs or whatever. If you are thinking about other people needlessly, you're actually not going to succeed as a business person, and those people will fall apart and that sort of thing. And that was sort of the root of what it was. I disagree, but then it later spiraled to overt cruelty, because there's the idea, and as I said, I disagree with it, but there's the idea that if I focus on being the best and I'm focused solely on that, then
hmm,
everyone who works for me will benefit from that, or anyone who will I will use my money to buy stuff and do things that will benefit. If I'm too concerned about other people, it's gonna no one's gonna succeed, is one argument. Then it just became like I really like kicking people in the teeth.
yeah.
And so that has occurred, I think. I think that Paul Ryan would argue that. And I think, again, I can disagree with him, but I think it's important to at least understand when someone like him is like, right, I mean, even David Brooks is like, well, why have people gotten so mean? I would say the key there is that your original policy as a electoral force, as a coalition building, that sort of individualism is not particularly very popular. And so you were sort of having to build a coalition based on people worst instincts, and you throw them a little bone and sort of say that this is sort of I can benefit from that, but my true goal is this. And
Yeah.
soon it's like the old cliche about I'm not really in the mob, but I need mob money to keep my business going. And so maybe I'll do a little help for them, whatever. No, you are in the mob. You're doing mob work. And so I think that's what they eventually sort of realized. And essentially these folks took over. David Fromm famously put it like, we thought that Fox News worked for us. Now we realize that we work for Fox News. And it, and that's tough for those folks to sort of realize now, but that's sort of where they are. I mean, populism especially was something that hit both the mainstream right and left, who really believe like, why are these people so upset? And so they didn't see Trump coming. The idea of I'm your guy, what I feel all of your pain and suffering, and I will make those people pay. And you know, uh,
Entirely true. Sorry. Like,
what was this about Bill Clinton? I guess can you put that back up? Bill Clinton ran on a platform that trickled down economics was rich people pissing on you, then went on to forward the we thug agenda, I guess Republican agenda, in his second term. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if Bill Clinton.
welfare reform.
I don't know if Bill Clinton ever actively ran on the idea that
I don't know that he did either, but I know that he was like pro NAFTA from the beginning, which is why we didn't like him to begin with.
um
Um,
no,
and
I
then,
think yeah, like someone like him and the others, I think the New Democrats were sort
right.
of yeah, the tax cuts for the rich are bad and some of this is bad, but it was a still sort of that Randian root of everyone works hard, the hard workers, and we will
And
help
that's
the
all
hard
that
workers.
matters. Also, like that was like the whole thing, like all that matters is like meritocracy, which they actually hate, by the way, which is like why they've gone bananas destroying Twitter. Um, it's all like, oh, it's about the individual. It's not about, socialism or doing things for other people. And people get in the habit of being like, okay, well, if I'm only doing stuff for myself, then why should I give a fuck about other people? Why should I care about how other people feel? Why shouldn't I wear a t-shirt that says fuck your feelings? And I think that people just very much like leaned into that because that was what they were taught. And part of the whole thing with, you know, it's not as though this is even a tendency that is particularly new to the Republican Party, or I guess Brooks is saying that society in general has gotten mean, but I think we're all still pretty nice, so fuck him. Um, is that they had the meanness going on for decades before, like, and not even just policy wise, like they had Rush Limbaugh, they had all these other people whose entire job was, hey, I'm going to be mean to people and then you're going to listen to me. And Republicans like the idea of, oh, Rush Limbaugh is Rush Limbaugh. He doesn't really represent us. We just listen to him. He's not, we don't really like listen to, no, 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 no. He's just, he's a comedian. He's an entertainer. And we listen to him for fun and for catharsis. But no, he was actually like directing their whole fucking agenda the whole time. Like it
Yeah.
was,
Well, his format,
mean. Like,
people run for office now, like Rush Limbaugh. So, and Trump perhaps popularized that. So, sort of not, but there are examples in history. Someone had posted up of Lester. That type of populist appeal has existed for a while. It just sort of, we don't study history, so you're shocked by it. I don't want to belabor this point a whole lot, but I do think with Bill Clinton, there was a sense of Democrats challenging Reagan specifically on trickle-down economics as that policy, while then being perhaps too afraid to embrace progressive economic policies. So the idea is that if we embrace it too much, so we'll say trickle-down economics is scam, but we will say, oh, well, I love businessmen. People, Biden did this recently. If you can make $1 billion, God love you. Which is very different from being like, well, the way to do that now is
you're not doing that without hurting other people. Sorry. It's like nobody's becoming a billionaire altruistically. Like that's not actually happening. People are getting horribly screwed. Like,
but yeah, so it's trying to thread that needle. So it's sort of, oh, well, we will engage. And Clinton did this in 92. When running, the idea when you talk about ending welfare as we know it and so forth, it's not about like everyone's going to have the government's going to give everyone a universal basic income, and so therefore it won't be sort of, you have to be on food stamps. It will elevate sort of the dignity of the social safety net. It was more that, more jobs, more this, and everyone will work hard and so forth. And then, what happens is that if you start to go to NAFTA and say, oh, well, we're going to shift these jobs that you're working so hard on, you're going to lose those jobs so that your boss can make a fortune on, cheaper labor, you're going to get people in key areas who feel like you screwed them over. And I think that's the legacy of that rhetoric, both with, you weren't looking out for us. And that opened the door for sort of the Trumpian America first type stuff. I get in trouble for this. I know Stronger Together was a sort of 2016 theme, but that seemed post-Trump. But I do believe early on, it was I'm with her more so than, and so, what happens is, and I say this as someone who's had some experience with advertising, Make America Great Again sounds good superficially. So the job is now on me to explain, here's why might be loaded. Here's where some racist themes upon it, what it means about when it was great, and here's this and this. But on its surface, okay, I want to be great
because
again.
everyone views their past as being a better time.
Exactly.
Because, you were younger and cuter then.
But I'm with her.
Like,
I'm with her, aside from, connection to sort of thing. But it just seems very much for a campaign that was saying don't get involved with cult of personalities, like if Trump or whatever, it's about this person. And you could kind of justify, well, but that again, it's like, oh no, it's not all about me. It is about this. And it's like, so that was sort of the way of where it felt like, well, no, you, I know a lot of liberals feel like populism is overtly racist and sexist and so forth, and there is a history behind that. But I think there is a sense of the average people. I mean, that's what the joy we see with unions. We see it now with the
Yeah.
WGA, and it's that like people all together join together.
By the
Um,
way, a majority of
working.
Americans currently support the, and I was going to do this today, but I ended up doing another thing in general or instead. Um, a majority of Americans, like 3/4 of Americans, support the actors and writers strike, which is actually pretty fucking awesome.
Mhm.
Like,
Um, with all respect, thank you. This is something I see a lot about with democratic policies in general. And here's my point of view. If you have 3 kids, you know, obviously saying by killing one of my kids, I made sure that 2 of them survived is objectively sure. Like, okay, I get that. But in theory, you know, you're not Robin's not the crazy leftist for saying maybe you shouldn't have killed any of your kids. So I feel like but that feels like the a lot of the democratic debate with the left, for especially folks on Robin's side of the spectrum. It's like, yeah, like we should not have killed any of those kids. There had to have been a better way. And everyone's like, well, no. Whenever we get power, we're gonna have to kill a kid.
yeah.
And that's just the way, but we're going to keep 2 kids alive. Like, so you just want us to kill all the kids. It's like, well, no, I want us to keep all of them alive.
And this is the thing. There are certain ways that that could have been handled where it was like, I think that Clinton in particular like would try and do like a, hey, we have to do this horrible thing, but now I'm very enthusiastic about it. Welfare reform is great. NAFTA is great. Like, no, it wasn't. Like, yes, it was signed before he got into office, or like hashed out before he got into office, but he should have blamed that shit on the Republicans. He should have blamed welfare reform on the Republicans so that people knew, hey, this is who is screwing you over, rather than being like, we're moderates. We're also not into, all these poor people in their Cadillacs
Mhm.
driving around. We're reasonable. We're not, it took on this like whole tone of, oh, we're not like, we're Democrats, we're not like liberals,
Yeah.
which was like a bad word back in the day, and now funnily enough it's like it's the equivalent of like calling someone a moderate now, which I kind of love. But
Well, I mean, if the point of view is that this is as good as Democrats can get, and that's fine. And I get that people believe that. I would just caution that you may believe this. It is important to understand that Republicans definitely don't. So I think they get there's a constant shock that Republicans aren't happy with compromise, where it's like, oh well, if you why are you trying to put? Obviously, you're not going to get rid of Roe v. Wade and then pass these crazy abortion. Like, surely you'll be happy with this moderate, but that's never the case. Like, maybe you'll throw out some of the more anti-racist text, but you're not going to throw out Harriet Tubman as well. But they don't. They go all in. They do believe
yeah,
they can get exactly what they want.
because really
So
the only people that are like, I'm happy with a teensy bit of what I want, are like moderate Democrats. Like, they're literally the only people on that particular team. um Everyone else is like, no, I want the things that I want.
yeah, I mean, it's just sort of, I get this. This is some of this ideas. It's like we live in a world that exists. That's someone had commented, and you don't know what it was like in those times. There was no way they could have done better than. And look, if you can believe that if you wish. I'm flattered that anyone thinks that I was not an adult during the Clinton administration. That is, black does not crack apparently. But I was very much
You
an
look
adult.
very young and vivacious, Stephen.
I was very much an
Your
adult
whole
during that
aura.
time. Yeah, and as you said, there was a sense of we've gotten power, and we're not feeling like we are making conceptions. Um, it's not like we're making concessions. We want this. Like
Yeah.
this is who we are. We're not those bad
Yeah.
Democrats from the past. So that's very different.
We're not the
And,
scary ones. We're not Jesse Jackson.
yeah,
Which is they
and
all shit all over Jesse Jackson, and I was not okay with that. Or my mom wasn't, and I agreed with my mom.
well, they've certainly changed their sort of tune. I mean, look, um, these choices that were made, and I would say this, I say because it's fascinating because a lot when earlier at the top of this, when I called out the Tom Nichols or whatever for revisionism about refusing to recognize choices Republicans had made from the 60s on that led to Trump, everyone's like, of course, like whatever. But I think there is on the left, a sense of revisionism about or unwillingness to engage in choices that were made during the Obama and the Clinton, specifically the Clinton administration, that might have led to this. And it's this fact that, like, no matter what happened, no matter how many concessions were made to sort of the mansions, right, to the mansion wing of the party, you've still hemorrhaged working class white guys and working class white women. Actually, I think there's a latest poll: white women without a college degree are still like 60% for Trump. Like, um, you still lost all those people over the past 30 years. So, it seems as if I would at least engage with folks like you, Robin, who have said like maybe the sort of country club, you know, style Democrat policies are going to alienate more than it's going to bring in. You're not
Yeah.
going, you're losing these key, because now it seems like, oh no, we're screwed because we're not going to care, like a state like Ohio where there's fewer people, especially white people with a college degree. We can't compete at a statewide level with them, even if we're winning on policy levels. Our brand has become so toxic there, and we have to question, why is it our brand? It's not abortion because they just voted on that. So it's not
Yeah.
these specific
Well,
issues.
because actually, like, no, that is absolutely a thing. Like, with with basically every single issue, people side with Democrats, like gun control, abortion, um, even like things like criminal justice reform, which people like to assume like, oh, that's just like crazy people like Robin who are like, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill people. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't put people in prison for 20 years for stealing a Snickers bar. Or things that people also think the left is wacky on, like healthcare. A majority of people want
Yeah.
everyone to have healthcare. Sorry.
And Robin,
Like,
all of that stuff, sorry to interrupt, but all that stuff you just said about especially crime and that crime bill, all of that, there have been quotes from people
yeah,
in the Clinton administration who, like, we gave up X, and the
yeah,
Gingrich and the Clinton still came back and it's like, you guys are just a socialists who want to let, you know, criminals out on the street to rape women. And that's not just an oopsie. Like, it's not like a negotiation. It's like, oh, okay, well, I gave this farm. These are human lives. So you
yeah.
sacrificed there are people still in prison now for a choice that didn't gain anything.
Yeah,
You
because no
believe,
one actually liked it except for like weird Republicans who weren't going to ever like you anyway. Sorry. And I would like to address something really quickly. Um, RE NAFTA, and even without the Rust Belt was going away. I actually grew up in the Rust Belt. Hi. Or I grew up in an industrial city. I grew up in Rochester, New York. I need to tell you guys, it was really horrible going to school and like on days when it was like, oh, Xerox or Kodak laid off 1,000 people, and you knew that like kids in your school were like in like that kind of position, and you knew that those they were gonna have to like go home and their parents weren't gonna have jobs. It was hard. It was like, I can't tell you how much that impresses on a person. Oh, sorry, I moved to Rhode Island, sorry, I moved to Rochester when I was 15, because my dad worked for Bausch and Lomb, which we did not tell anyone because everyone was very mad at like all of the major companies there at the time. um it was heartbreaking. And the city, that it was a beautiful city when we first like moved there, and it like very clearly like went downhill for a variety of reasons, largely because of like more like right-wing policies. regarding a lot of things, but also like because people just didn't have jobs. And that affected people of color way more than white people because like who do you think was working in the factories? It wasn't majority white people. Um and it was absolutely jarring. It was horrifying. And people went through that and it's an actual trauma. Like you can, David Brooks loves to joke about trauma, but it was an actual trauma. It was a trauma to see that happen in real time. Um, and the way that moderate Democrats brush that shit off, because, yeah, sure, maybe they were working on going overseas. Literally nothing was done to save any of those cities or to make things better. And yes, things were fine in the suburbs where everyone's parents was in management, and I include myself in that. My dad was a vice president. He wasn't working on the line or anything. um, it was traumatizing and it made people angry. And you know the Democratic Party has never really wanted to deal with that because they're like, oh, well, whatever. No one cares about any of you anyway. Um, you're angry for the wrong reasons. Probably you would have all lost your jobs anyway. Everyone would have, and it's a horrible way to respond to that. And I just need to tell you that it makes me fucking hate people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this idea that there was nothing, I just feel, and this is part of the marketing, the idea of like, if I produce plays that failed or lost a demographic, and it's like, it's nothing that I'm doing. It's just that the audience is getting dumber. I deserve to go out of business. And so the idea that like, it's not, if we're starting to hit, if we hemorrhaged Latino voters in Florida, which we used to win, it's not Biden. It's something that Biden could have done. It was just they were going that way anyway, because AOC exists, and the Rust Belt falling was just they all got racist, and that's a huge thing of like whenever there's a sort of lost cause around Hillary Clinton, I found of the idea that we were not just that she deserved to be president, but we deserved her as president. And I get that her supporters really felt devastated when this woman, who was a very accomplished woman, did not become president. I get that. But it's this weird thing of like the voters failed her. Oh, if you could have gotten past your misogyny and your racism and whatever. And I get that. But if you look at it as if it's only racism or misogyny, then you're sort of giving up politically. It's just sort of like, okay, all right, well then what's the like really like they're just racist, they're deplorables, and you can't reason with them. What's the answer? And I think that is something that is, you have to engage with what you're doing, your choices you're making, that you're sort of narrowing your options politically. That
And if people are hurting for non-stupid reasons, then you can't just be like, oh, we're going to take your non-stupid reasons and then make them stupid. Also, this is going on in the comments, and I would like to agree with M. Vario here. Yeah, the whole reason for the New Deal was to basically shut socialists up. Fun fact, like, like they were, Roosevelt, did some good stuff, but he also, the whole purpose of doing that was that people were becoming very attracted to socialism, becoming very attracted to anarchism because things were so bad. And the New Deal largely came about because they were like, okay, these people are going a little bit too far. We've got to appease them so that they don't, go full socialist, so that they don't elect, what's his face, every mannequin guy, Huey, not Huey Lewis or Newton. There's another Huey, and I can't think of his name right now. The every mannequin guy.
Huey Long.
Yes, Huey Long. Sorry.
That was our playing of charades. Three.
But like they were.
Sorry. Go ahead.
He was very afraid of like people becoming anarchists, people becoming socialists, And the idea was that if you appease people just enough so that they can survive, they won't be attracted to these radical philosophies. And that's a lot of what it was.
Hmm. I think, but the option of like be you too can be wealthy
Yeah.
is not necessarily connecting. So we're at an hour now. Is there anything else you would like to share with the folks, Robin, before we?
Everyone be nice. No.
Thank you
Don't
for,
be mean, be nice.
yeah, thank you for joining us. Remember to like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, rewatch, because you'll always catch up on the Easter eggs. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Bye.